Hello and welcome to my another live demonstration on Azure Active Directory domain services. And some of you might have been watching my other videos, as you know that I'm creating a series of different Microsoft live demonstration videos on different types of workloads. You will see some of them in the description and comment section. If you have not watched my other videos, please do watch them and also subscribe to my channel. And a brief introduction. My name is Atul Raizada. I represent Logicalis here in United States. We are Microsoft US Gold Partner, and we have the honor and privilege to work with Microsoft as well as with several hundred customers, helping them with their cloud journey, right? And today's topic is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. There is a special reason that I wanted to bring it to you guys, because I have seen invariably there is a confusion in the industry, and many of the administrators, system admins, or even directors and CIO and CFO has a confusing idea about um, the capabilities around Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory domain services. So my effort is to clarify that, and hopefully you will find it interesting, and you may be able to use it more appropriately. So with that, let's just dive into. And before I start talking about this particular diagram and visual here, let's just look into what are the options and what are we talking about. Then we come back here. So what are the different directory services that Microsoft is offering? Primarily, there are two, right? So one of them that we are all very familiar of is Active Directory domain services, right? And all of us are very familiar with that. I believe any organization, irrespective of size, uses Active Directory domain services as one of their most important IT infrastructure component, right? I don't think this is an exaggeration. This is being used by all across the globe. And I don't need to talk much about Active Directory domain services, except for, which is relevant in this scenario, that Active Directory domain services is delivered through domain controllers, right? And domain controllers are the one that allows you to configure, deploy Active Directory, right? This is going to be an important thought process once we come down. Now, the second thing is Azure Active Directory. Now, many of you has also been familiar with Azure Active Directory, and as more and more customers are adopting Microsoft Azure or Office 365, you are getting acquainted with Azure Active Directory. I just want to clarify that these two directory services, which is On-Prem Active Directory domain services and Azure Active Directory, are two different binaries. They're not exactly the same, and this also has been a general confusion between uh, different industry players, right? So there are two different directories. They use LDAP as a protocol for sure, but they're not the same, right? That's very important. And Azure Active Directory, in my viewpoint, is a game changer for Microsoft, because Azure Active Directory works like a very powerful, robust, simple, easy identity management solution, right? And if you have not seen into that, I strongly recommend to look into, because if I can put it into very simple words, Azure Active Directory is a repository of identities, or I call them generally a bucket of identities. Why do I call it as a repository or bucket? Because you can synchronize multiple Active Directory forests into one single common Azure Active Directory, and that is an extremely powerful solution. Now, this is also to be noted that though those identities are kept in Azure Active Directory as a repository, but their authentication varies, right, depending on which identity comes from where and what kind of authentication is configured. So this gives us a flexibility in identity management solution, which is extremely important. And many of us have been taking the advantage of Azure Active Directory. We all know that we use it in Office 365 workloads. We also see Azure Active Directory being used for single sign-on for almost 2,800 plus software as a service that is being that can be configured through Azure, right? Pretty extremely powerful solution. You also know that we can use Azure AD Proxy for on-prem applications. You also know that Azure Active Directory is also offering Azure B2B, Azure B2C. So the scope and the possibilities are enormous here with the advent of Azure Active Directory. And then the third thing comes here is Azure Active Directory Domain Services, right? And I think that is where some of the confusion comes in. Please note that I mentioned earlier when I talked about Active Directory Domain Services, how it is being delivered through domain controllers, right? So think and consider Azure Active Directory Domain Services as your domain controllers which are being used to manage Azure Active Directory. I think this is the simplest way that you can understand that, right? So now the management of Azure Active Directory is through Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which are pretty much the domain controllers. So you do have now the ability to manage Azure Active Directory like through your regular Active Directory users and computer snappings, group policies, and whatnot, right? So it gives you that kind of an interface. Now, it also has to be noted that with this availability of Azure Active Directory domain services, now you have the ability to join the different VMs which is running infrastructure as a service inside your Azure in the same VNet area, right? So basically now you have the ability to join the different VMs infrastructures as a service, and it allows you to take use the Azure Active Directory domain services for different workloads, different apps for authentication purposes, whether they want to use LDAP or Kerberos or NTLM. And that is the premise. So basically, if I can somehow go back here, um, and so this slide now would make more sense, because what we are saying here is that Azure Active Directory Domain Services is your domain controller as a service for lift and shift scenario. So basically what is happening and what is possible with Azure Active Directory Domain Services, that when organizations start putting their workload in Azure, whether they are infrastructure as a service, different VMs, or whether they are bringing over more and more apps to Azure, that's where you can take advantage of Azure Active Directory Domain Services, because now it's a lift and shift of your on-premises VMs and apps to Azure, as you already have Azure Active Directory Domain Services serving those apps or those VMs in the cloud, right? So think this way: if you would not be using Azure Active Directory Domain Services, what was your option? The option was very straightforward, right? And many of us have been doing that. So what is that? In general terms, that you establish a connectivity to between your data center and Azure, right? And then you extend your Active Directory into Azure. And when I say extension of your Active Directory in Azure, what does that really mean? It simply means that you would deploy a couple of VMs inside Azure as infrastructure as a service. Your connectivity is already established, and then you would run DC promo on those VMs to bring them as domain controllers running in Azure. You can obviously go around Active Directory sites and services and configure all that like you do it normally in your on-prem environment. And that gives you the local presence of your Active Directory services inside Azure, serving your application and VMs that you get there. Having said that, you still rely on the network connectivity, replication, and all that good stuff, right? What Azure Active Directory Domain Services is doing is that it is eliminating the need of that. You really don't need to put domain controllers in Azure, because the Azure Active Directory Domain Services act as a domain controllers for you, and you can definitely join your VMs inside Azure to Azure Active Directory Domain Services, and your apps can start authenticating, whether it's a LDAP or whether it's a NTLM or Kerberos, through Azure Active Directory. Now, the key point that I want to emphasize here is that only the VMs running in that VNet in Azure could be joined to Azure Active Directory. That does mean that it is not a replacement for your on-prem Active Directory, right? I just want to make sure explicitly clear here, because this is where people are getting confused. You say, hey, now we have got a Active Directory running in Azure, which we can replace our on-prem Active Directory. That is not the case. As I said, this is limited to the VMs and the application that you are running in Azure Cloud. They can take the advantage of Azure Active Directory domain services without installing the domain controller. So that's the flexibility that you get into when you start bringing your workloads to to Azure, right? Having said that, you have the ability to join your Windows 10 devices or Windows 8 devices to Azure Active Directory, right? These are on-prem devices. They don't need to be in an Active Directory, but that's a very limited set of operations, right? And most organizations, especially in a small and medium business section, can join these machines to the Azure Active Directory. And in terms of the management of these devices, they can be managed through Intune, which comes through Enterprise Mobility plus Security Suite, right? So that's very much doable. Does or By joining these Windows devices, Windows 10 or Windows 8 devices, um, to Azure Active Directory, does it replaces the need of on-prem Active Directory? Perhaps not, right? Because the managerial capacity or capabilities by joining them to Azure Active Directory is limited to Intune. And if you really want to manage those machines in a conventional way through regular group policies and log on scripts, log off scripts, startup script, shutdown script, system center, then you would still have to go back to your on-prem Active Directory. So again, this is not a true one-to-one replacement of your on-prem Active Directory. The good news here is that organizations now have the ability to take the advantage of both. What does that really mean? That means you can join your Windows 10 devices regularly, like you do it to your on-prem Active Directory. At the same time, you also have the ability to join these devices to Azure Active Directory. And in that case, you take advantage of both of them. You take advantage of your on-prem Active Directory, like you do all the time, and then you also have the ability to start using and taking the benefit of Azure Active Directory too. So that is the premise, and I'm going to show you a couple of those workstations running in my lab and demonstration here, right? So that's what we are talking today. Now, when we talk about Azure AD Domain Services, there are two distinct models here. One is for cloud-only organizations, and you might argue that, hey, why do we even need to worry about it? The fact of the matter is that I am hearing this message more often than ever, that there are customers in the small and medium business section who are telling us that, hey, we don't need any data centers. We are not interested, and we want to operate from cloud. And that is what their whole premise is. So that number is growing significantly in last 8 or 9 months in my viewpoint, right? I am working with more customers that are interested into their operations and their IT running through cloud. So for those customers, it's a very straightforward. When we talk about Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory could be deployed in two different ways, right? One is when you deploy an Office 365 tenant, it is automatically provisioned there, so no additional work required. And many customers would fall into that category because most of our customers are running now Office 365. Having said that, if the customer is not running Office 365, then obviously you can go ahead in Azure and create Azure Active Directory manually, right? So that's both the options. So in this scenario, you have an Azure Active Directory in Azure, either created through Office 365 or you created there, and then you create identities inside Azure Active Directory. When I say identities, it means users and groups, and obviously, as I mentioned, you can also join devices to Azure Active Directory like Windows 10, Windows 8 devices. So that is your identity management solution right here in Azure Active Directory. And on top of it, in the center, this is being managed by Azure AD Domain Services. So now we are providing you a vehicle to support this, and that is Azure AD Domain Services, which are the domain controllers here. And now when you start bringing more workloads into Azure, whether they are infrastructure as a service, different VMs, or whether you are bringing more application here, you can easily join them to Azure Active Directory Domain Services and here you go. So you have got pretty much all your infrastructure, all your IT running from cloud, and that is the premise that we are talking about here, right? So this is for cloud only organization. And most often we will come with this scenario here where we are talking about hybrid organization, and this is more classical deployment. More often you will find that customers have their on-prem active directory that I'm showing here in the bottom right hand side, and this on-prem active directory is synchronizing to the Azure Active Directory through Azure AD Connect. Most of us are familiar with Azure AD Connect, how simple and how powerful this tool is. Now, once you are syncing your identities, which are users as well as groups, to Azure Active Directory, this is populated here, and this is constantly being populated. One of the key requirement here for Azure Active Directory domain services that you should also sync your passwords, right? So if you're just doing single sign-on without password, then probably this solution is not a solution for you. So you would be syncing passwords here, and as long as you're syncing password, and by the way, when I talk about password synchronization, right, so many people have this confusion. There are multiple ways of configuring Azure AD Connect as well as authentication. So one of them is a cloud only authentication, where that was the earlier example where you create identities only in Azure cloud. Second is same as sign on, where you synchronize passwords along with identities from your on-prem Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. Third is the single sign-on, where you federate your Active Directory, on-prem Active Directory with Azure Active Directory. So users get a single sign-on where you use either ADFS or third-party single sign-on providers, right? That's the third one. And the fourth is a hybrid one where you can combine. You can use single sign-on, but you can also sync passwords, right? So password synchronization is a requirement here. And then the next option comes, which is an Azure AD Proxy, which is not the solution that's going to work here, because Azure AD Proxy is for those customers who do not want to sync their password. So if your customers are using Azure AD Proxy and they're not syncing their passwords to Azure, then perhaps this is not the solution that we should be talking about. And then there's one more option, which is a seamless sign-on, right? This is interesting. This has been brought very recently, where you don't need ADFS, you don't need AD Proxy, and users can authenticate directly to your Active Directory just through Azure AD Connect synchronization options, right? This is very powerful stuff, guys, and I wish I have more time to talk and elaborate about it, but I just wanted to give you different options here, right? So bottom line here is that your passwords should be syncing from your on-prem Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. There is one more trick here that we need to talk about, and once I get into demo, I'll show you that too. Now, as again as before, this Azure Active Directory is being managed by the Azure AD Domain Services. So now you have your domain controllers in the Azure, and now you can start taking the benefit and advantages of that, because when you start bringing the different workloads, whether they are VMs as infrastructure as a service in Azure or apps, they can be either joined to the Azure Active Directory domain services, or they can start taking the advantage of authentication like LDAP, anti-LM, and Kerberos, and voila, here you go. And you don't have to worry about extending your Active Directory into Azure, worrying about replicating, worrying about patching up of these domain controllers, antivirus, blah blah blah. All that stuff goes away now, because now you are using cloud as a service for domain controllers as a service in the cloud, and that is the beauty of Azure Active Directory domain services. I hope that clarifies what it is, and we are not really talking about replacing the need of an on-prem Active Directory, though we have Azure Active Directory, and that is now being managed through Azure Active Directory domain services, but this is not truly a replacement of an on-prem Active Directory. I hope that establishes that thought process clearly here. And if I go here, we can now get into the demo. And when I get into the demo, the first thing that I would like to show you is the devices and Azure Active Directory. Then we will go into Azure Active Directory domain services. And then I have deployed, we'll talk about some use cases, that how and where you can use Azure Active Directory domain services. And then we will show you a use case where we would be having a remote desktop form, RDP form, running in Azure and taking the advantage of Azure Active Directory domain services. With that, let's dive into the demo itself. So folks, here I am, and I am at my Azure admin portal here, and I am on my Azure Active Directory here. Now, when I go to my Azure Active Directory, the name of my Azure Active Directory is Logicalis on the top. I've got my users, groups, AD Connect running here. I've got my devices here. Now, my lab and my demonstration is pretty interesting, and as a matter of fact, as I mentioned that Azure Active Directory is a repository of identity, you will find that I am syncing actually 6 different Active Directory forests into one single Azure Active Directory, right? So let me quickly bring that interface to make sure that what we are talking about. So I have got one Active Directory forest called as lglmsft.us, right? And this is where we would be testing the some of that RDP application, RDP form. The 2 account that I'm using here just to show you is JB Garden, right, in this lab or demonstration. If you see the account jbgarden.lglmsft.us, there is a single sign-on already configured for this environment, and there is obviously AD Connect running here. Then I have got another Active Directory which is called as test.local. I got identities here. I got the third Active Directory forest, which is thn.local, and I have got another 3 Active Directory forests running from my another lab. I don't think I need to show you that, but those are another 3 and they are using another AD Connect tool. Here is my AD Connect tool, right? If you see the 3 different Active Directory forests, test.local, lglmsft.us, thn.local. This is my Azure Active Directory, lgldemo.onmicrosoft.com, right? So that is the lab environment, and if I go back into the portal here, so I've got my users and groups, all users, and you will see there are like, this is another domain here, this is another forest, this is, let's see here, this is the first lglmsft.us is the first forest, fwamus.info is second forest, azlgl is third forest, amfw.info is fourth forest, dmn test is the fifth forest, fwa. So this is actually, I just wanted to show you that I have the ability of bringing the multiple Active Directories into one single Azure Active Directory, right? And that's where the value proposition that you will see around here, this Azure Active Directory domain services, would be way more meaningful, because now you have the ability to allow the access to that application or to that service or to those VMs, just to not one Active Directory, traditional on-prem Active Directory, but you have got multiple Active Directories here too. And if I go back here to the devices, right, those were users and groups. So you will see here, these are the devices that are already joined, and most of these devices that I have registered here, and there are 2 different ways to do that, right? Registered and joined, and that has an implication on Intune. How does this would appear in Intune, whether they would appear as a desktop or a mobile device. That depends on how you join these machines to Azure. But most of these machines are configured with on-prem Active Directory, as well as they are configured and joined to Azure Active Directory. So this is the environment that we have. Very straightforward, very simple. And then I also want to go back and mention one more thing. I should take the advantage of here. And if you go all groups here, when you add the Azure Active Directory domain services, it would create the security group called as AADDC administrator, and the members of this group has the privileges and rights, something very similar like you see a domain admin kind of a thing in your Azure Active Directory domain services. So if you see here, I have added three members here actually, right? So that's, you can add it if you want to give some additional privileges inside the Azure Active Directory domain services. With that, so this is straightforward, folks. I think all of you are pretty familiar with that. This is nothing new here. Now let's talk about and try to do a Azure Active Directory domain services. Now I just want to let you know that because I only have one um, uh, Azure Active Directory in my tenant here, and I have already created the Azure Active Directory domain services. So in this demonstration, I would not be able to create another one, right? Because I already have one, but I'll show you what you need to do to create Azure AD domain services. So here you go. And once you get this, you can, as always, there is nothing else that you can click here except for the create button. And when you create the button, as expected, I am going to get this message, right? Because I have already a managed domain already exists for this directory, and that managed domain is the Azure Active Directory that I was showing you before. Now, if you are, let me just show you what would be your experience in this scenario. So if you, once you click it, you will get to this screen where you would see your directory services name. Here you can define your Azure Active Directory domain services DNS name, right? In my lab environment, where we are going to go back in few seconds, the name of that my Azure Active Directory domain services is agds.com, which stands for Azure Domain Services. And then you can define your subscription, your resource group, your network, your administrative group. As I already showed you that, somebody click OK, and here you go. It might take some time before it completes the operation, right? It's not instantaneously that, hey, here you click OK and now your Azure Active Directory domain services are ready. Be patient. It may take an hour sometime, maybe more, before you are actually start seeing the Azure Active Directory domain services. So guys, folks, this is very straightforward, right? Probably it will take you 5 minutes to do that, and your Azure Active Directory, and it will take its own sweet time to configure and build it in the background, relax, and in next hour or so you are good, you're ready, and you can start taking the benefits of Azure Active Directory domain services. So let's just go into the Azure Active Directory domain services and see how we can take the advantage of Azure Active Directory domain services. So here I am, and this is, as I mentioned, my Azure Active Directory domain services that I created was azds.com, Azure Active Directory domain services. If you see here, there is nothing much that you need to do here, right? Your regular stuff. The window, that the screen that on the right hand side is important. This is where I would strongly recommend to go ahead and read this and follow these instructions. Instructions for cloud only Azure AD tenants. Once you click it, it will give you what you need to do for cloud only tenant, which is what I showed you earlier in my slide. And the second is, when you click this instruction for the synced Azure AD tenant, this is very important because it would take you to a web page where you can download a script, a PowerShell script, and that PowerShell script you would run on your Azure AD Connect tool. And what it would do is that it would allow your Azure AD Connect to synchronize NTLM hash, because by default the NTLM hash is not being synced by the Azure AD Connect, which is a requirement for Azure Active Directory domain services to make sure those identities work transparently, and I'll show you. But when you click on this, you will be able to get to that script, and let me show you what I'm talking about. If I go back here to this AD Connect tool, I think I have this here. This is the PowerShell script. So if I edit it, you need to populate these two with as per your environment, and this is case sensitive. So what I'm saying here is that this should match with your connector or management agents, right? So for an example, if you see here, my domain name, the connector for my domain Active Directory on-prem domain is lglmsft.us, which is reflected here. My Azure Active Directory connector or management agent is lgldemo.onmicrosoft. It has to match this, and then you just copy or execute this PowerShell and then let the AAD connect or AAD sync run, or force the AAD sync, and you're good to go. That's pretty much configuration portion of Azure Active Directory domain services are, right? Once you're done, then let's go back to the Azure portal and let's see what we have done here, right? So if you go here, now I also mentioned that on this VNet, the VNet that is being used by this resource group, right? So if I go to the resource group here or network here, so all resource group, this is the resource group, and the resource group that I'm using for this Active Directory I think is LGL Domain Services, right? Here you go, and that's the one I'm using for Azure AD Domain Services. If you see here, this is also linked to um, the network here is also LGL Domain Services, and I configured the two domain controllers here as the DNS servers for this network, right? So if I go back here, so I have got LGL Domain Services is my network, resource group is LGL Domain Services. What I did here is that I configure the DNS servers here as the two of the DNS servers that I have been given there for the, where is that service here, LGL front end, I guess. Yep. So here you go, 10505, 10504. So my VMs, when I create those VMs in this resource group and define the LGL front end VNet here, they automatically get the DNS, and then that allows me to join these machines to the domain or to Azure AD Domain Services, to be precise, right? So now let's look into that what we have here, that we have VMs that I created here. They are running in the same resource group, LGL Domain Services. And folks, when this LGL domain, sorry, when this Azure AD Domain Services were introduced, there was a limitation on the VNet creation through the classic mode, not through the ARM. I think that is now gone. All my machines and all my VNets are created through ARM here, so don't get confused. You can very well do that with your ARM here, right? So I have got this machine, all of them are already joined to Azure AD Domain Services, and they are fully operational, and there is a remote desktop form. So if you look here, AZRD BKR, this is a broker machine, remote desktop broker machine 01, 02. I got a gateway there. I got a session host server, remote desktop session host 01, 02, and I have published a remote app just for demonstration purposes as a calculator, which you will see that take the advantage of the domain services, as a AD Domain Services for authentication purposes, right? And that's what we have. Now, when we talk about use cases here of using Azure Active Directory Domain Services, many of the organizations that are bringing their workloads into Azure, this is an easy no-brainer here, right? So instead of creating those domain controllers as infrastructure as a service, start that, and then you can definitely join those machines, bring those apps, and let those apps get authenticated through Azure Active Directory Domain Services. You eliminate the dependency on those apps and on those VMs from the Azure, from your on-prem Active Directory going forward, which is massive, right? And as I said, because you can have multiple identity source here, multiple Active Directory forests, so that is even better, right? Probably in migration acquisition scenario, this would prove way more meaningful than it is today. So that's one case scenario. Then second case scenario is, as I said, for cloud only organization. For them, it's a no-brainer. You can immediately start doing that and take the full advantage of Azure Active Directory with the help of Azure Active Directory Domain Services. There could be other LDAP application that you want to use, and that has always been a pain point, especially I do a lot of large acquisitions and mergers and divestitures projects, and LDAP applications are always the pain. This is where you can use that, and you can bring all those most of those LDAP applications now talking to Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Those are some use cases, and I think it makes sense. Now let's see that in action. So I have got this machine. Let me try to connect to this machine, and then we'll see. So this is my RDP form. This is just a regular Windows server, And oh, let me, because I rebooted these machines. Give me a second. Let me just download the RDPs one more time here, because I turned them off and turned them on, so the IPs are changed. Hold on one second. So here I am, and I'm connecting to that machine. Um, that is my one of my Windows 2012 R2 server, where I am gonna be using AZDS slash NTLM authentication RDP dot test 01. And let me bring it here. You will see that I have already configured the regular group policies to give you a welcome screen and all that good stuff here. So I can click OK here. And what you would find here, folks, is that this machine is joined to, let it come up, this machine is already joined to the Azure AD domain services. So you see here, this is the machine AZDS Win 12 SO02, domain is azds.com, very straightforward. And if I go to tools here, I have my Active Directory tools installed. If I can go to Active Directory users and computers, here is my Active Directory, and see here, this is the domain controller. This is exactly what I have been mentioning throughout my session. Here is the domain controller, and here is what by default all the computer objects are created into AADC computers, and all the users in a flat OU. They are all in flat OU unless you want to change it and move it into separate OUs, right? Now you will realize here that in AADC computer, I am not seeing all those Windows 10 devices that I showed you. The only machines that I'm showing you here are those machines or those VMs that are in Azure, right? All these machines are in Azure VMs, right? And they're already joined here. Now the users, you will see all the users coming from 6 different Active Directory forests, right? So all of these people here are showing up here. And this group I already mentioned to you is kind of a domain admin group, right? Exactly not domain admin, but the users or members of this group get administrative privileges on Azure AD domain services. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, if I want to show you those 2 accounts that we were talking about, so the one of the account that we mentioned was JB Garden, right? And they are coming from 6 different Active Directory. Here you go, JB Garden, and this is the account, right? Saw that JB Garden at lglmsft.us. There is a single sign-on, there is a password sync, and also NTLM password hash is also being synced now. RDP, you already saw that's how we logged into this machine, RDP test 01. So pretty very regular stuff, folks, that you do it on-prem. It gives you the flexibility and the familiarity of the tools that you have been using on-prem. That's my point here, right? So now same way, if I go back here, and I will also have the group policy management here, right? And same familiarity that you all are familiar with: group policy management, forest, domains, AZDS, group policy object. You have all your group policies here. You can create mode, you can configure it. Settings, there may not be all the required setting that you see in on-prem. There could be some deficiencies or some missing settings there, but by and large you have got all of them here. I have not really digged into the differences in the GPUs, but You have everything that you are looking for. I actually created that with the welcome screen that you just saw. So very straightforward, folks. Here there is nothing that you need to worry about. Once it is done, it is up and running, and you have your domain controllers in Azure, right, through Azure AD Domain Services. Now I need to go back here, and now let's do this one more time to show you the RDP, and that's working, right? So I think I accidentally closed my VMs here. So here's that VM that we were working. And the last piece of this demonstration is to go and see whether the RDP works or not, right? So I can go to the Internet Explorer, connect to the remote desktop web services. I have not yet configured the certificates, so you might see the certificate error here. This is the server that I showed you, Easy RDBKR01, which is the broker, and the RD web services. And as I mentioned, certificate, no big deal. And here I go, right? So now I can use my NTLM authentication here in Azure AD Domain Services, RDP test 01. I already showed you that account, where this account is originating from. And here is my remote app, the best possible app in the world, right, folks? So just to demonstrate you. And here is what it is connecting to that broker machine, the welcome screen. And use it. Here you go, and my application is now launched, right, the calculator. And that's all, folks, that we need to talk about in today's session. I hope you find it helpful, you find it useful, and some of your doubts are cleared. I thank you for your time, really appreciate, and stay tuned. I'm coming with more videos and more presentation on different workloads. Very exciting videos, very exciting live demonstrations, folks, I can promise you. And if you like my videos, please subscribe to my channel. I would be putting some other links to other videos in the description and the comment section of this video. Please do watch. If you have not watched my other videos, I can assure you that they are very absorbing, intriguing, and very informative as well. At least that's how I feel it, and I've got a lot of good feedback on all of my videos so far. So hopefully you would like it. And again, thanks a lot, and have best of your day.